Get out.
Ma'am, please.
Did I stutter? Get off my porch, boy.
I love your daughter.
Victoria went still. Then she laughed, sharp, ugly, like glass breaking.
Love? You? Roach from the gutter. Thinks he can crawl into my family?
Lily chose me.
Lily doesn't know what she's choosing. Ashy hands, busted shoes. You reek like the back of a city bus.
She shoved him back and threw a $100 bill at his face. It bounced off his cheek.
That's more than your mama makes. Scrubbing floors all week. Take it. Stay away from my daughter.
He didn't pick it up. She thought $100 would bury him. She had no idea what she just planted. Brandon Pierce had been inside plenty of buildings that weren't meant for him. The financial aid office. The back entrance of the country club where his mother once picked up catering shifts. The dean's waiting room where he sat for 2 hours before anyone acknowledged he existed. But the Ashford estate was different. The driveway alone was longer than his entire block in Glenmore Heights. Stone pillars, hedges trimmed with surgical precision, a fountain in the center spraying water that probably cost more per month than his mother's rent. He counted his steps from the iron gate. 32. Lily had told him to come at 4. She's not as bad as people think, she'd said, squeezing his hand in the campus parking lot that morning. Just be honest. She'll see what I see. Lily was wrong. The front door opened before Brandon could knock. A housekeeper, gray uniform, no expression, looked at him the way you'd look at a stain on a white tablecloth. She led him through a foyer of marble and crystal without saying a word. Victoria Ashford was already waiting. She stood at the bottom of the staircase in cream silk, arms crossed, gold earrings catching the chandelier light. She didn't greet him. She just looked. Head to toe to head, the way you'd inspect something you found on the bottom of your shoe. So this is him. She wasn't talking to Brandon. She was talking to Lily, who had just appeared in the doorway behind her. This is the one you've been sneaking around with. Mom, just let him... Let him what? Sit on my furniture? Eat at my table? Victoria turned to Brandon. Tell me something, boy. What exactly do you think you're offering my daughter? Your mama's scrub bucket? A roach-infested apartment in the hood? Brandon's jaw locked. I'm offering her respect, Mrs. Ashford, that's all. Respect. Victoria repeated the word like it tasted rotten. Respect doesn't pay tuition. Respect doesn't keep the lights on. Respect doesn't change what you are. A broke, nappy-headed boy from the worst zip code in this city who somehow thinks he belongs in my living room. Mom, stop it! Lily's voice cracked. She stepped forward, but Victoria raised one finger, just one, and Lily froze. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Victoria circled him slowly. Her perfume was sharp enough to sting. I see a stray. I see someone who'll drag my daughter down to your level. I see the kind of boy who knocks a girl up and disappears, just like your father did to your mother. Brandon's fists clenched so hard his knuckles went white. His eyes burned, but he did not speak. Victoria reached into her clutch, pulled out a $100 bill, held it between 2 fingers like something dirty. Here. She flicked it at his chest. It bounced off and spiraled to the marble floor. That's probably more cash than your family's seen in one place. Buy yourself a bus ticket back to where you came from. And if I ever see you near my daughter again, I'll make sure you regret it. The bill lay on the marble, Benjamin Franklin staring at the ceiling. Lily was crying, silent, shaking. One of the housekeepers looked away. Brandon looked at the bill, then at Victoria, then at Lily. He did not pick it up. He turned, walked back across the marble, past the chandelier, past the fountain, 32 steps back down the driveway. The iron gate closed behind him with a sound like a vault sealing shut. He stood on the sidewalk, 20 years old, hands in his pockets, heart slamming against his ribs like it wanted out. He looked back once, memorized every window, every pillar, the exact angle of the roofline against the evening sky. Then he walked home. Brandon Pierce didn't grow up poor, he grew up without a father. The man left when Brandon was 3, took the car and a suitcase, and never sent so much as a birthday card. Without space. A two-bedroom apartment in Glenmore Heights where the hallway smelled like mildew and the elevator hadn't worked since before he was born. Without margin. One missed paycheck, one broken bone, one bad week away from the kind of trouble that swallows families whole. But Elaine Pierce made sure her son never grew up without pride. She worked 2 jobs. Days at the hospital laundry, industrial machines, chemical heat, 8 hours folding sheets that smelled like bleach and sickness. Nights restocking shelves at a grocery store 4 bus stops away. She left before Brandon woke up. She came home after he fell asleep. Some weeks they only spoke through notes on the kitchen counter. Dinner in the fridge. Quiz tomorrow. Study. I love you. Lock the door. Her hands were always cracked, always dry. She rubbed lotion into them every night, and by morning the cracks were back. Brandon once asked her why she didn't buy better lotion. She looked at him and said, "Because better lotion costs grocery money." He never asked again. Brandon's real education happened at his grandmother's place. Ruth Pierce ran a small repair shop on Garrison Street, the kind of place where people brought toasters, lawnmowers, and old radios that nobody else would touch. The sign out front said, "Ruth's Repairs." The sign was crooked. Half the bulbs were dead. But inside that shop, Brandon learned everything school couldn't teach him. He learned to diagnose problems by listening. A rattling engine meant one thing. A clicking furnace meant another. He learned that most people didn't need new things. They needed someone who cared enough to fix what they already had. And he learned numbers. Ruth kept her books in a green spiral notebook with a coffee stain on the cover. Revenue, expenses, margins. Brandon started helping when he was 12. By 14, he'd built her a spreadsheet on a second-hand laptop. By 16, he'd renegotiated her supplier contracts and increased her take-home by 30%. "You've got a head for this," Ruth told him one evening, wiping grease from her hands. "Don't waste it fixing toasters." He didn't plan to. Brandon tested into State University on a full academic scholarship. Business administration. First person in his family to set foot on a college campus as a student. Elaine cried the day the letter came. Ruth taped it to the wall behind her register, right next to a photo of Brandon at age 6 holding a wrench bigger than his arm. He met Lily Ashford in the university library on a Tuesday afternoon in October. They both reached for the same book, Henderson's Principles of Microeconomics, 3rd shelf, 2nd copy from the left. Their hands touched on the spine. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be," she said. She had green eyes and a laugh that made the librarian shush them twice in 10 minutes. She didn't talk about money. She didn't talk about her mother's company or the estate on the hill or the name that opened doors across the eastern seaboard. She talked about supply chains and emerging markets and why she thought the gig economy was a house of cards. Brandon fell hard. The kind of falling where you know exactly how dangerous it is and you do it anyway. They kept it quiet. Coffee shops on the west side of town, far from Ashford's social circles. Study sessions that turned into long walks. Long walks that turned into the kind of conversations where you tell someone things you haven't told anyone. Not because they asked, but because you trusted them enough to listen. 6 months in, Brandon knew 2 things. He loved this girl, and her world would never let him keep her. Elaine knew. Mothers always know. "That girl," she said one night, standing in the kitchen doorway. "She's from money, isn't she?" "Yeah." "And her people, they know about you?" "Not yet." Elaine looked at her son for a long time. She didn't say, "Be careful." She didn't say, "End it." She just nodded slowly and said, "Make sure you're standing on your own ground when they find out. Don't let anybody catch you on theirs." Brandon didn't understand that advice until the afternoon he stood in Victoria Ashford's foyer with a $100 bill at his feet. Lily disappeared on a Thursday. Brandon showed up to their usual spot, a coffee shop called Brewer's on the west side, 2 blocks from the bus depot. He waited 40 minutes. She didn't come. He called. Straight to voicemail. He texted. Nothing. He called again that night, the next morning, 3 more times before lunch. On Friday, a letter arrived at his apartment. Thick envelope, embossed letterhead. Ashford and Associates, Family Legal Counsel. The language was precise and cold. Cease all contact with Lily Ashford. Restraining order will be pursued. Any further attempt at communication will result in legal action. Brandon read it twice. The second time, his hands were shaking. He found out later, from a classmate who knew a classmate who worked in the registrar's office, that Lily had been withdrawn from State University and re-enrolled at a private college in Greenwich, Connecticut. Victoria had moved fast. Within 72 hours of the foyer incident, Lily was gone. New school, new phone number, new zip code. Like she'd been erased from Brandon's life with a legal document and a first-class plane ticket. He didn't eat for 3 days. He went to class but couldn't focus. The numbers that used to light up his brain like a switchboard went flat. Professors called on him and he stared through them. His GPA dropped a full point in 2 weeks. He stopped going to Ruth's shop. He stopped answering Elaine's calls. He stopped doing laundry, stopped making his bed, stopped opening the blinds. The apartment smelled like stale coffee and unwashed clothes. Takeout containers stacked on the counter. A textbook sat open on his desk to the same page for 9 days straight. His scholarship advisor sent an email. Your academic standing is under review. He read it, closed the laptop, and went back to staring at the wall. One night, a Wednesday, maybe a Thursday, the days had started blurring, Elaine let herself into his apartment with the spare key. She found him sitting on the floor of his bedroom, back against the wall, staring at nothing. The $100 bill was in his hand, smoothed flat. He'd been holding it so long the creases had warmed to his skin. Brandon. He didn't look up. Brandon, look at me. He did. His eyes were red, not from crying, from not sleeping, from staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, wondering if Lily was doing the same thing somewhere in Connecticut. Elaine sat down beside him on the floor. She didn't say, it'll be okay. She didn't say, forget about her. She looked at the bill in his hand and said, what are you going to do with that? I don't know. Then I'll tell you what your grandmother would say. Elaine took a slow breath. They measured you by your pocket, baby. Make them measure you by your name. Something shifted behind Brandon's eyes, small, quiet, like a gear that had been stuck finally catching. He went to class the next morning, sat in the front row, took notes until his hand cramped. After the lecture, he walked to Professor Whitman's office, a cluttered room on the 3rd floor of the business building, and knocked. Harold Whitman was 64 years old, retired logistics executive, 26 years at one of the largest freight companies in the country before he got tired of boardrooms and started teaching. He wore reading glasses that sat crooked on his nose and kept a jar of butterscotch candies on his desk that no student ever touched. Pierce, sit down. You look terrible. I need help, Professor. With what? With everything. Whitman studied him for a long moment. Then he leaned back, unwrapped a butterscotch, and said, start from the beginning. Brandon did. Not the part about Lily, not the part about Victoria. He talked about Glenmore Heights, about Ruth's repair shop and the green notebook, about the spreadsheet he built at 14 and the supplier contracts he renegotiated at 16. About the patterns he saw in systems that nobody else seemed to notice, how inventory moved, how routes overlapped, how waste piled up in the gaps between departments. Whitman listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. When Brandon finished, the professor took off his glasses, cleaned them with his tie, and put them back on. You know what your problem is, Pierce? What? You're sitting in an introductory business class when you should be solving real problems. Whitman pulled a folder from his drawer. I've got a friend who runs a trucking company outside the city. 60 trucks. Hemorrhaging money. Routing's a mess. He's been asking me for months if I know anyone who can take a look. Brandon blinked. You want me to... I want you to stop feeling sorry for yourself and start using that brain for something. Whitman slid the folder across the desk. Can you do that? Brandon took the folder, opened it. Numbers, routes, fuel costs, delivery windows. His eyes moved across the page, and for the first time in weeks, the switchboard in his head lit up. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." He walked out of Whitman's office carrying that folder like it was made of gold. The $100 bill was still in his pocket. He'd folded it into a small square and tucked it behind his student ID. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just taken the first step toward owning everything Victoria Ashford would one day lose. The trucking company was called Gray Line Freight. 60 trucks, 43 drivers, one dispatcher named Carl who ran everything off a whiteboard, and a cell phone held together with duct tape. Brandon spent the first week riding along, not in the office, in the trucks. Shotgun seat, clipboard on his knee, watching. He rode with a driver named Eddie who'd been running the I-95 corridor for 19 years and knew every way station, every truck stop, every shortcut that didn't show up on GPS. "You're the college kid," Eddie said on the first morning, not looking at him. "Yes, sir. And they're paying you to ride around and take notes? They're paying me to figure out why the company's losing money." Eddie laughed. "I can tell you that for free. Half our trucks run empty on return routes. We deliver a load to Philly, then drive back with nothing. That's 400 miles of fuel burning for zero revenue." Brandon wrote that down. Then he wrote down 18 more things Eddie mentioned before they'd even crossed the state line. By the end of the week, he had a notebook full of data points that the company's management had never thought to collect. Which routes overlapped? Which warehouses had loading docks too small for the newer trailers? Which clients consistently booked late and caused cascade delays? Where drivers sat idle for hours waiting for paperwork that could have been filed electronically. He went back to his dorm room and didn't leave for 4 days. Sometimes at 2 in the morning, the data blurred and his mind drifted. He wondered what Lily was doing in Connecticut, whether she'd tried to reach him, whether Victoria had told her some lie, that Brandon took the money, that he didn't fight for her, that he disappeared the way Victoria always said his kind would. He'd pick up his phone, thumb hovering over her old number, the one that no longer worked, and then put it down. Not yet. Not like this. He turned back to the screen. What he built wasn't complicated. It was a routing algorithm, a piece of software that took every variable he'd collected and mapped the most efficient path for each truck, each day, accounting for load weight, fuel costs, delivery windows, and driver hours. But the genius wasn't the math. The genius was that Brandon had ridden in the trucks. He'd seen what the spreadsheets couldn't show him. He'd talked to the drivers. He knew which warehouse managers were slow, which roads flooded in rain, which clients would wait an extra hour if you called ahead. The algorithm wasn't theoretical. It was built from the ground up by someone who'd sat in the passenger seat and watched. He presented it to Gray Line's owner, a tired man named Walter Briggs, who'd been considering selling the company. Brandon projected the numbers on a laptop screen propped up on a stack of invoices in Walter's office. "If you implement this routing system, you'll eliminate 62% of your empty return miles. That's roughly $210,000 in savings per quarter." Walter stared at the screen. "Per quarter?" "Per quarter. Son, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've hired consultants from firms that charge more per hour than my drivers make in a day. Not one of them ever rode in a truck." Brandon shrugged. "I learned better that way." Walter implemented the system the following Monday. By the end of the first quarter, Gray Line Freight had saved $214,000, $4,000 more than Brandon's projection. Word spread the way it does in tight industries, not through press releases or LinkedIn posts, but through phone calls between owners who drink together on Friday nights. "You hear about Walter's kid? The one from the university?" 2 more companies called within a month, then 3 more. Then a freight broker in Delaware who'd heard about it third hand and wanted Brandon to look at his entire Eastern Seaboard operation. Brandon incorporated Pierce Logistics Solutions from his dorm room. The paperwork cost $87. He filed it on a Tuesday between his 10 o'clock macroeconomics lecture and his noon statistics lab. He walked into class that morning as a student. He walked out as a business owner. Nobody noticed the difference. That was fine with him. His first office was a rented desk in a co-working space above a dry cleaner. The chair wobbled. The Wi-Fi dropped every afternoon at 3. He didn't care. He had a phone, a laptop, and a whiteboard. Better than Carl's duct tape operation, but not by much. He reinvested everything, every dollar. No car, no apartment upgrade, no new clothes. He wore the same 3 shirts in rotation and took the bus to client meetings. One client, a warehouse operator in New Jersey, once asked him why a consultant showed up on public transit. "Because I'd rather spend the cab fare on server time," Brandon said. The client signed a 12-month contract that afternoon. The money grew, but Brandon didn't change. He still lived in the same apartment in Glenmore Heights, still ate at the same corner deli where the owner knew his order by heart, still visited Ruth's shop on Saturdays and helped her balance the books, even though his own books now had 6 figures in them. Ruth watched him work one evening and shook her head. "What?" Brandon said. "Nothing. You just remind me of your grandfather. Man could have sold that shop and retired. Never did. Said the work was the point." Brandon smiled. "Smart man." "Stubborn man, same thing." Revenue hit $200,000 in the first year, $400,000 in the second. By the time Brandon walked across the stage at State University's graduation ceremony, 22 years old, magna cum laude, Pierce Logistics Solutions had crossed $1 million in annual revenue. Elaine sat in the third row. She wore a blue dress she'd bought at a thrift store and ironed that morning the same way she'd ironed Brandon's white shirt the day he walked up the Ashford driveway. She clapped so hard her palms were red when he found her afterward. "I'm proud of you," she said, holding his face in both hands. Her fingers were still cracked, still dry. Brandon hugged her. Tight, long. The kind of hug you give someone when you know exactly how much they sacrificed to get you here. The $100 bill was tucked inside his diploma case, not taped to the wall, not framed, just folded small and slipped inside, next to the degree, where only he would know it was there. A reminder, not of what Victoria said to him, of what she didn't know she started. The first year after graduation, Brandon didn't sleep much. Not because of anxiety, because there wasn't enough time. Pierce Logistics Solutions had 6 clients when he crossed the stage. By the end of that summer, it had 14. By Christmas, 22. He moved out of the co-working space and into a real office, a narrow storefront on Clement Avenue with a cracked front window and a landlord who charged $800 a month because nobody else wanted the lease. Brandon patched the window himself, bought 4 desks from a liquidation sale, and hung a sign, Pierce Logistics Solutions. The letters were black on white, clean, straight, nothing like Ruth's crooked sign on Garrison Street. But every time he looked at it, he thought of hers. His first hires were 2 analysts fresh out of community college. Then a developer named Sarah Calloway, who'd been freelancing from her kitchen table and building tools 10 times better than what the industry was using. Then a sales rep. Then another analyst. Then a fleet coordinator who used to drive for one of Brandon's early clients and understood the business from the cab of a truck. By year 2, Pierce Logistics had expanded beyond route optimization. Brandon saw the bigger picture, supply chain management. Not just moving products from point A to point B, but redesigning how companies thought about the entire pipeline. Procurement, warehousing, inventory forecasting, last-mile delivery. He wasn't just fixing routes anymore, he was rebuilding systems. The contract that changed everything came in March of his second year. Atlas Retail, a Fortune 500 company with distribution centers in 11 states, had been hemorrhaging money on logistics inefficiencies. Their VP of operations had heard about Brandon from Walter Briggs, who'd been telling anyone who would listen about the kid who rode in my trucks. The pitch meeting was in Atlas's corporate headquarters, a glass tower in Midtown, 36th floor, a conference room with a mahogany table and a view that made Brandon's old apartment look like a shoebox in a canyon. He wore his best suit, his only suit, a charcoal 2-piece he'd bought at a thrift store and had tailored for $40. It fit perfectly. 6 executives sat across from him. 3 had MBAs from Ivy League schools. 1 had literally written a textbook on supply chain management. Brandon presented for 22 minutes. No slides, no flashy graphics, just a whiteboard, a marker, and the numbers. When he finished, the VP leaned forward. "You're 23 years old." "Yes, ma'am." "And you're telling me you can save us $40 million over 3 years?" "I'm telling you the data says I can. If I'm wrong, you fire me. No severance." She stared at him for 10 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and signed the letter of intent. The Atlas contract tripled Pierce Logistics overnight. Brandon hired 30 more people in 60 days. He moved to a bigger office, a full floor of a building downtown with actual meeting rooms, a server closet, and a coffee machine that didn't require a manual restart every morning. He hired from Glenmore Heights, deliberately, not as charity, as strategy. He knew those neighborhoods were full of people like him, people who were sharp, hungry, and overlooked because their resumes had the wrong zip code. His fleet coordinators came from the same streets he grew up on. His data entry team included 2 single mothers who worked the exact same hospital laundry shift his own mother had worked for 15 years. One of them, a woman named Denise, came into Brandon's office on her first day and said, "I worked next to your mama for 6 years. She talked about you every single shift." Brandon didn't say anything. He just nodded and pointed to her desk. But after she left, he closed his office door and sat there for a long time. By year 3, Brandon established Pierce Holdings as a parent company. Pierce Logistics Solutions became one division. The others? Pierce Supply Chain Consulting, Pierce Data Analytics, and, the move nobody in the industry expected, Pierce Commercial Real Estate. Real estate. The same industry Victoria Ashford had built her empire in. Brandon didn't plan it as revenge. He'd seen the data. Commercial real estate near logistics hubs was undervalued and poised for growth. Warehouses were becoming more valuable than office towers as e-commerce exploded. The numbers made sense. The margins were there. The opportunity was there. But he'd be lying if he said it didn't cross his mind. Every time he signed a property deal, every time he walked through a warehouse he now owned, somewhere in the back of his head was a marble foyer and a $100 bill on the floor. Industry magazines started calling. Forbes ran a short profile. The 25-year-old disrupting American logistics. Inc. magazine named Pierce Holdings one of the fastest-growing private companies on the East Coast. A podcast host asked him what his secret was. "I ride in the trucks," Brandon said. The host laughed. Brandon didn't. Meanwhile, quietly in the background, in business journals Brandon read but never mentioned to anyone, Ashford Properties was bleeding. Victoria had expanded too fast. 3 luxury developments in markets that couldn't support them. A hotel project in Miami that went 40% over budget. A commercial tower in Charlotte that sat half-empty 2 years after completion. She'd leveraged everything, personal assets, family trusts, the estate itself, to finance projects that looked impressive in press releases and disastrous on balance sheets. The dominoes were falling in slow motion. Contractors filed liens. Investors pulled out. 2 of her senior executives resigned within the same month, citing strategic disagreements, which in the real estate world meant they saw the ship sinking and grabbed a lifeboat. Brandon noticed. Not because he was watching for it, because his real estate analysts flagged Ashford Properties as distressed assets during a routine market scan. He read the report at his desk on a Thursday evening, sat with it for a long time. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel pity. He felt something stranger, recognition, like watching a building you once stood inside start to lean. He never contacted Lily, not once in 3 years. Some nights he almost did. He'd pull up a search engine, type her name, see a photo, a LinkedIn profile picture, a tagged image at a charity gala, a blurry shot from someone's Instagram, and close the tab. Not because he'd stopped thinking about her, because the version of himself that could face her wasn't ready yet. He was building something, and until it was built, he had nothing to say that wouldn't sound like begging. The $100 bill hung behind his desk now, framed, behind glass. Visitors sometimes asked about it. "Family heirloom," he'd say. Nobody pressed. The call came on a Monday morning in April. Brandon was in his office reviewing quarterly projections when his head of real estate acquisitions, a sharp woman named Claudia Voss, knocked twice and walked in without waiting. You're going to want to see this. She placed a printout on his desk, a public filing. Ashford Properties had defaulted on 3 major commercial loans totaling $112 million. The banks had issued a notice of foreclosure. A court-supervised auction of the company's entire portfolio, 14 properties across 5 states, had been scheduled for 6 weeks out. Brandon read it twice, the second time slower. The whole portfolio? Everything. The Charlotte Tower, the Miami Hotel project, the retail centers in Virginia, their headquarters building, even the... Claudia paused. Even the family estate. Brandon looked up. The estate is in the portfolio? Victoria leveraged it as collateral 2 years ago when the Miami project went over budget. It's part of the package. Brandon leaned back in his chair. Through the glass wall of his office, he could see his team working. 53 people on this floor alone, another 40 across 2 satellite offices. 3 years ago, he'd been filing incorporation papers between lectures. Now he was looking at a printout that represented the total collapse of the woman who'd thrown a $100 bill at his face and called him a stray. He didn't smile. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the kind of quiet that comes before a decision you can't take back. What's the estimated market value? He asked. Distressed valuation, probably 80 to 90 million for the lot. In a healthy market, it's worth 200 plus. But nobody's going to bid full value on assets this toxic. The legal entanglements alone will scare off most buyers. But not us. Claudia studied him. Not us. We've got the capital. We've got the infrastructure to absorb and restructure. And frankly, 3 of those properties sit right in our logistics corridor. They're strategically perfect. Brandon stared at the printout for a long time. The name Ashford in bold letters at the top. Give me the weekend, he said. He spent that weekend the way he spent most difficult decisions. Alone. Not in the office. He drove to Glenmore Heights, parked outside Ruth's old repair shop. She'd passed away the year before, quietly, in her sleep, the way she would have wanted. The shop was closed now, the sign still crooked, the windows dark. Brandon had bought the building through one of his holding companies. He hadn't decided what to do with it yet. He sat in the car and called Professor Whitman. Harold, I need to talk something through. It's Saturday, Pierce. This better be interesting. Ashford Properties is going to auction. The whole portfolio. I'm in a position to buy it. Silence on the line. Then, Ashford, as in the woman who... Yeah. Is this revenge or business? Brandon almost laughed. Whitman always cut straight through. The numbers work. 3 of the properties are in our logistics corridor. The rest can be restructured and resold within 18 months. The return profile is strong. Then it's business. But it's also her. Another pause. Brandon, let me ask you something. If this portfolio belonged to anyone else, anyone with a different last name, would you still bid? Brandon didn't hesitate. Yes. Then you have your answer. The numbers don't care about history, and neither should you. Monday morning, Brandon walked into the office early. Claudia was already at her desk. We're bidding, he said. Claudia nodded. She'd already started the paperwork. The next 6 weeks moved fast. Due diligence, legal review, financial modeling. Brandon's team dissected every property in the Ashford portfolio, every lease, every lien, every outstanding permit. They found what he expected. A company that had been run on reputation and leverage rather than fundamentals. Beautiful buildings, terrible books. Meanwhile, the industry was buzzing. A portfolio this size hitting auction was rare. Reporters called, competitors circled, but most backed away once they saw the depth of Ashford's liabilities. Too messy, too risky, too much legal baggage. Pierce Holdings didn't flinch. On the other side of the equation, Victoria Ashford was living in free fall. She'd sold her jewelry. She'd let go of the household staff, all except one housekeeper who refused to leave. She'd fired her CFO, her attorney, and 3 project managers in the span of 2 months, looking for someone to blame for a collapse she'd engineered herself. Lily had come back from Connecticut. Not by choice. There was nothing left to fund her life there. She returned to the Ashford estate and took over as the company's last marketing director. a title that meant almost nothing when there was no company left to market. She spent her days answering creditor calls and drafting press statements that nobody ran. She hadn't spoken to Brandon in 5 years. She didn't know he was the one bidding. Victoria knew a company called Pierce Holdings was the lead bidder. Her remaining attorney had mentioned it during a conference call. Pierce Holdings, privately held, logistics and real estate, very aggressive growth profile. They've got the capital to close. Victoria nodded absently. The name Pierce meant nothing to her. It was just another company picking over the bones of her life's work. She had no idea who was on the other side of that name. The auction was set for a Thursday in June. Downtown Convention Center, Room 4B, court supervised, open to qualified bidders. Brandon spent the night before at his desk, not working, just sitting. The framed $100 bill hung on the wall behind him. Benjamin Franklin staring at the ceiling, the same way he'd stared at the Ashford chandelier 5 years earlier. Brandon looked at it for a long time. Then he turned off the light and went home to get some sleep. Tomorrow, he was going to buy everything Victoria Ashford ever built, and she was going to watch. Room 4B smelled like old carpet and new anxiety. The convention center downtown wasn't glamorous. Fluorescent lights, folding tables, a projector screen showing lot numbers in blue text on a white background. It looked more like a county board meeting than the dismantling of a real estate empire. But that's exactly what it was. The room was full. Bankers in dark suits, attorneys with leather briefcases. 3 rows of Ashford employees who'd come to watch their jobs get auctioned off like furniture. A handful of reporters sat in the back with notebooks open. A court clerk stood by the door with a clipboard. Victoria Ashford sat in the second-to-last row, right side. She wore a black dress, not designer, something from a department store rack bought for the first time in her life. Her hair was pulled back, no earrings, no gold. She looked 10 years older than the woman who'd stood at the top of a marble staircase and told a 20-year-old boy he wasn't worth the air in her house. Lily sat beside her, gray blazer, white blouse, hands folded in her lap. She hadn't spoken to her mother since they'd arrived. She didn't know what to say. What do you say when you're watching your family's name get stripped from buildings you grew up in? The auctioneer, a court-appointed official named Graham, began at 9 sharp. Lot 1, Ashford Commercial Tower, Charlotte, North Carolina, 42,000 square feet. Starting bid, $12 million. A paddle went up from a firm in the 3rd row. Then another from the back. The numbers climbed. 14 million, 15, 16.2, 17 million. A voice from a phone line. Pierce Holdings legal counsel bidding remotely. Silence. No counter. Sold. 17 million to Pierce Holdings. Victoria's jaw tightened. She wrote something in a small notebook. Lot 2. The Miami Hotel Project. Starting bid, 22 million. 2 bidders. 1 dropped out after the 2nd round. 26.5 million to Pierce Holdings. Victoria stopped writing. Lot 3. Lot 4. The Virginia Retail Centers. Each time the same voice on the phone. The same name. Pierce Holdings. By Lot 6, the warehouse complex in Delaware, the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a bidding war. It was a takeover. One company, one bidder, systematically absorbing everything Ashford Properties had ever built. The reporters were Googling Pierce Holdings on their phones. The Ashford employees were whispering. A court officer asked the back row to keep quiet. Victoria sat perfectly still. Her face hadn't changed, but her right hand was gripping the armrest so hard the tendons showed through her skin. Lot 9. Lot 10. The office park in Maryland went for 11.2 million. An Ashford employee in the front row covered her face with her hands. Lot 12, Lot 13, Lot 14. The final lot. The Ashford family estate. Graham cleared his throat. Lot 14, residential property. Ashford Estate, 12.4-acre parcel, Greystone Avenue. Includes main residence, guest house, and grounds. Starting bid, 8 million. Victoria closed her eyes. 8 million. Pierce Holdings. No counterbid. The room was silent for 10 seconds. Sold. $8 million to Pierce Holdings. Graham set down his gavel. That concludes the auction. Total acquisition by Pierce Holdings, $84 million. The buyer's representative will now approach to sign the transfer documents. A door opened at the side of the room. Footsteps on thin carpet. Brandon Pierce walked in. He wore a navy suit, not from a thrift store this time. Custom tailored, perfect fit. His shoes were polished. His posture was straight. He carried a single leather folder. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the reporters. He walked to the front table, shook Graham's hand, and sat down. Lily saw him first. Her hand went to her mouth. She made a sound, small, involuntary, something between a gasp and a word that didn't finish forming. Her eyes filled immediately. Victoria didn't see Lily's reaction. She was looking at the man at the front table. Something about the walk. Something about the way he held his shoulders. A flicker of recognition. Distant, impossible, like seeing someone from a dream you'd rather forget. Then he turned around, and Victoria Ashford's face went white. The boy from the porch. The boy she'd called a stray, a roach. The boy she'd thrown $100 bill at and told to crawl back to the gutter. He was sitting at a table with $84 million worth of her life's work signed over to his name. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Brandon didn't acknowledge her. Not yet. He signed each document methodically, page after page. His pen moved with the same steady hand that had once gripped a clipboard in the passenger seat of Eddie's truck. When the last page was signed, he stood. He turned to face the room. He looked at the Ashford employees first. 3 rows of people who didn't know if they'd have jobs tomorrow. My name is Brandon Pierce. I'm the founder and CEO of Pierce Holdings. As of today, we are the new owners of the Ashford portfolio. He paused. Every single employee of Ashford Properties will retain their position. No layoffs, no restructuring cuts. You have my word. I'll see you Monday morning. A woman in the second row started crying. A man next to her exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 6 weeks. Then Brandon looked at Victoria. The room went absolutely still. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small glass case. Inside it, pressed flat and perfectly preserved, was a $100 bill. He walked to where Victoria sat, stopped in front of her, the same distance she'd stood from him on her porch 5 years ago. I never spent it, he said. Quiet. Not angry, not smug, just a fact. He placed the case on the empty chair beside her. Victoria looked at the bill. The same bill she'd thrown at a 20-year-old kid's face on a spring afternoon. Her hands trembled, her lips pressed together so tight they lost their color. She didn't speak. She didn't move. 5 years of contempt and certainty collapsed into a single silent moment in a room that smelled like old carpet. Brandon held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. He got 4 steps before he heard it. Brandon! Lily's voice, shaking, raw. He stopped. He didn't turn around right away. He stood there, one hand on the doorframe, and let himself breathe. Then he turned. Lily was standing in the aisle, tears running down both cheeks, the same way they had 5 years ago in a marble foyer, except this time nobody was telling her to stop. Brandon looked at her. Just looked. 5 years of silence and distance and phone numbers that didn't work, and browser tabs closed at 2 in the morning. All of it compressed into one look across a room full of strangers. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. Slow. Once. Then he walked out. She found him in the hallway. Brandon was leaning against the wall next to a vending machine, leather folder under one arm, staring at the floor. He'd walked out of that room like a man in complete control. But here, alone, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, he looked like the 20-year-old kid who'd walked down a driveway with a broken heart. Lily stopped 3 feet away. Hi, she said. Hi. You bought my family's company. I did. You bought my house. I did that too. She laughed, short, wet, closer to crying than laughing. I looked for you every year. I tried your old number, your old address. Everything was gone. I wasn't hiding, I was building. She looked at him, not at the suit or the deal, at the boy who hadn't picked up the money. I'm sorry, she said, for what she did, for what I didn't do. You were 20, Lily. She's your mother. That's not an excuse. No, but it's a reason. They stood there. The vending machine hummed. Can I buy you a coffee? She said. Last time someone in your family offered me money, it didn't go great. She laughed. This time it was real. They went to a diner 2 blocks away. Cracked vinyl booths. A waitress who called everyone, "Hun." They talked for 3 hours. Not about the auction, not about Victoria. About the 5 years between. What she'd done in Connecticut. What he'd built and why. About Ruth's shop and Elaine's cracked hands and a routing algorithm born in the passenger seat of a truck. They didn't rush it. They exchanged numbers. He called the next day. She called the day after. Then dinners. Then long drives. Then the kind of slow, careful rebuilding that happens when 2 people pulled apart decide, on their own terms, to come back together. 6 months later, the Ashford portfolio was fully restructured. Charlotte Tower, 92% occupied. Miami Hotel, first profit. 14 properties, 0 layoffs. Every promise kept. Brandon established the Ruth Pierce Scholarship Fund. Full-ride business scholarships for students from Glenmore Heights. The first class had 12 recipients. Elaine visited the estate on a Saturday. Brandon watched from the window as she walked up the driveway, the same 32 steps he'd once counted with shaking hands. She stood in the foyer and put her hand on the marble wall and didn't say anything for a very long time. Victoria sent a letter, handwritten, 3 pages. Brandon read it once, folded it, and put it in his desk drawer. He never told anyone what it said, but the next time someone asked about the framed $100 bill on his wall, he took it down. He didn't need it anymore. On a Sunday evening in October, Brandon and Lily stood on the front porch of the estate, the same porch where Victoria had called him a roach and thrown money at his face. The fountain still ran. The iron gate was open. Lily leaned into him. You know what's funny? What? She said you didn't belong here. Brandon put his arm around her. She was wrong. What would you have done with that $100 bill? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your story. If this one hit you the way it hit me, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.